On the day Julian's first love returned to the country, it coincided with my discovery that I was 3 months pregnant. At the welcome banquet, his first love pointed at the ferocious Tibetan Mastiff in the manor and coquettishly said she wanted to see Beauty and the Beast. Julian extinguished his cigarette butt and cast a cold, indifferent glance at me. Go, play with the beast. I protected my slightly swollen abdomen and pleaded in a trembling voice, Julian, I'm pregnant, the child is yours. He sneered and casually sipped his red wine. Sophia, how many times are you going to fabricate this lie? Since you love acting so much, go perform to your heart's content in the cage. 2 black-clad bodyguards flanked me on either side and dragged me to the front of the cage. The cold iron lock clicked open with a cotta, and a strong, foul stench assaulted my senses. Miss Sophia, please. The bodyguard's tone was flat, but his actions were extremely rough. I was forcefully pushed inside, stumbling and falling awkwardly onto the cold ground. Clang! The iron door slammed shut behind me, completely isolating me from that world of elegant attire and perfumed shadows. The Tibetan Mastiff Aries in the cage was startled, emitting a low growl from its throat. It stood up, its massive size astonishing, with a pair of eerie green eyes fixed intently on me, the intruder. Saliva dripped from its sharp teeth. The guests' exclamations and snickers pierced through the night, clearly reaching my ears. Oh my God, is Julian serious? This Sophia is really something, daring to tell any lie, angering Julian, now there's a show to watch. Lillian weakly nestled in Julian's arms, her sweet voice carrying a faint concern. Julian, sister won't be in trouble, right? Aries looked so fierce. Julian held her waist and handed her a glass of champagne, his movements gentle. What's there to fear? Isn't she the best at acting? Let her perform to her satisfaction. His words were casual, yet they were the sharpest knife, stripping away my last shred of dignity. I held onto the cold iron bars and slowly stood up from the ground, feeling a subtle cramp in my lower abdomen. I instinctively protected it with my hand. Baby, don't be afraid. Mommy is here. Aries approached me step by step, its muscles tensed, assuming a pre-attack posture. The surrounding air seemed to thin. I did not retreat, just quietly gazing at it. In the second before it was about to pounce, I suddenly spoke, emitting a very light syllable. Sit. The growling Tibetan Mastiff paused in its actions. It tilted its head in confusion, seemingly trying to recognize this familiar command. I repeated it, emphasizing the order. Aries, sit down. A miracle happened. The beast that terrified all the guests actually obediently sat down, its threatening growl turning into a aggrieved whimper. It even wagged its tail ingratiatingly. The clamor outside the cage instantly ceased. Everyone looked at me with incredulous eyes. Lillian's smile froze on her face, and she looked at Julian in disbelief. Julian, what's going on? Julian also narrowed his eyes, his scrutinizing gaze falling on me with a hint of inquiry. Of course, he wouldn't know that this Tibetan Mastiff was the birthday gift I gave him 3 years ago. All its commands were personally taught by me. He just never cared. Seeing this, a flash of resentment crossed Lillian's eyes. She picked up a bloody steak from the waiter's tray and waved it at me. Sister, you're really impressive. Since you have such a good relationship with Aries, it must be happy to share food with you, right? After saying that, she flicked her wrist, and the steak arced through the air, landing precisely at my feet. On the steak, a speck of white powder flashed by. Almost instantly, the originally docile Aries smelled that scent, and its eyes turned red in a flash. It seemed thoroughly enraged and lunged fiercely at me. Ah! The guest's screams pierced my eardrums. My pupils constricted, I had no time to dodge and could only instinctively curl up, using my entire back to fiercely protect my abdomen. The anticipated severe pain did not come. Bang! A muffled loud noise, the sound of flesh colliding with the iron cage. Martha! I turned back in shock and saw the old servant who had been the only one to give me warmth after I married into the Xie family, now using her frail body to bear Aries's mad charge in my place. The iron cage shook violently, and Martha's forehead hit the bars, instantly drawing blood. "Quick! Pull it away!" Julian finally changed his expression and sternly shouted. The bodyguards rushed up in a flurry, tools in hand, trying to control the frenzied Aries. In the chaos, Lillian panicked and hid in Julian's arms. "Julian, I'm so scared. I didn't know it would turn out like this. I just wanted to joke with sister." Julian patted her back to comfort her, but his gaze toward me was bone-chillingly cold. "Sophia, are you satisfied?" My whole body felt ice-cold, and a warm flow slid down between my legs. I looked down and saw bright red blood soaking my skirt hem. "My child," I murmured to myself, immense panic gripping my heart. "Julian, save my child." I grabbed the iron bars and shouted hoarsely at him. He looked at the blood on my skirt, first stunned, then showing deep disgust and mockery. "Addicted to acting? Sophia, to attract my attention, you've even prepared such props?" Lillian also suddenly realized, covering her mouth with a handkerchief, full of heartache. "Sister, how could you, using fake blood bags to deceive Julian's feelings? That's too much. Even if you want him to look at you more, you can't use this method." Every word of theirs was like a needle, ruthlessly piercing my heart. I married him for 3 years, loving him like a joke for 3 years. 3 years ago, I first met him at a charity auction. He sat in the corner, silent and taciturn, out of place with the surrounding splendor. Just because others said he had a stomach ailment, I silently bid for that ancient painting said to have miraculous stomach-nourishing effects. Later, I learned that he was simply in a bad mood that day. But I still gave him the painting, and he casually tossed it to his assistant. I thought that as long as I tried hard, one day I could warm his cold heart. Now I understand that a heart not on you can't be warmed no matter how hard you try. "Call Dr. Andrew over." Julian coldly issued the order. A spark of hope ignited in my heart. He still couldn't bear it, right? Dr. Andrew was the CS family private doctor and arrived quickly. At Julian's indication, he conducted a simple examination on me through the cage. Moments later, he stood up and respectfully shook his head at Julian. "Mr. Julian, Miss Sophia is just overly frightened, plus fatigue these days, leading to menstrual disorder. There are no signs of pregnancy." Boom, my world completely collapsed. The last trace of patience on Julian's face vanished completely, replaced by overwhelming anger and contempt. He stepped forward, looking down at me condescendingly, word by word. "Sophia, clean this up. Don't dirty Lillian's eyes." "Clean up?" I repeated these words, feeling absurd and ridiculous. He wanted me to clean up the blood I shed myself because it would dirty his beloved's eyes. The surrounding guests had dispersed, but those looks of sympathy, contempt, and schadenfreude seemed still imprinted in the air. Martha was helped aside for simple bandaging. She looked at me worriedly, her lips moving, but she dared not say another word. The frenzied Aries had been injected with a sedative and dragged away. In the vast cage, only I remained with the mess on the ground. And that glaring pool of blood. Lillian, stepping in high heels, elegantly walked to the front of the cage. She took a mop from the servant's hand and passed it to me through the bars, her movements gentle as if bestowing alms. "Sister, get up quickly, the ground is so cold. Julian also cares about you, afraid you'll really damage your body and won't be able to fulfill your wifely duties later." She deliberately emphasized the word wife, as if reminding me that I wouldn't sit in this position for long. Julian's mother, my mother-in-law Victoria, approached at some point. She had always looked down on my background, and now her face was full of disgust. "Sophia, have you caused enough trouble? You've disgraced the Xie family. Playing tricks at Lillian's welcome banquet, what are your intentions?" I looked up at her, my lips chapped. "I didn't." Slap. Victoria directly took a car key from the nearby bodyguard and smashed it hard against the iron cage, producing a piercing sound. "You dare talk back? I've seen plenty of women like you, resorting to any means to climb into a wealthy family. Now that Lillian is back, you start using these despicable tricks to secure your favor? I tell you, the mistress of the Xie family can only be a socialite with a clean background like Lillian. What are you? Every word of hers was harshly vicious, trampling my self-esteem underfoot. Julian stood not far away, watching coldly, with no intention of stopping it. As if the farce before him had nothing to do with him. Seeing me silent, Victoria's arrogance grew. Gone mute? Get out here immediately and apologize to Lillian. Apologize for ruining the banquet tonight. The bodyguard opened the cage door. I held on to the cold iron bars, slowly propping myself up. The sinking pain in my lower abdomen became clearer, each step like walking on knife edges. I walked to Lillian. She looked innocent, even stepping back as if I were terrifying. Sister, don't be like this, I don't blame you. Apologize. Victoria commanded sternly. I looked at Lillian's pitiful face and suddenly smiled. Why should I apologize? I did nothing wrong. They were wrong, it was this world that inverted right and wrong. Seeing me unmoving, Victoria completely lost patience. You're rebelling. Come, hold her down. Make her kneel and apologize to Lillian. 2 bodyguards immediately stepped forward, each grabbing an arm, trying to press me down. I struggled desperately, but my knees still bent little by little. Just as my knees were about to touch the ground, my peripheral vision caught something. It was my phone that had fallen from my pocket during the dragging. The screen had been lit up by someone. A newly popped-up message was clearly displayed on the screen, from a contact noted as Big Brother. Sophia, found it. The Xie Group's largest overseas investor, Shield Capital, is under our family's name. We can withdraw funds at any time. The screen stayed lit for only a few seconds before quickly dimming. So fast that no one noticed. Except me. I was locked in the bedroom, or rather, imprisoned. The door was locked from outside, and the windows were nailed shut. Julian deprived me of all freedom in the most direct way. Martha, taking advantage of the dead of night, secretly used a spare key to open the door and brought me some light porridge and medicine for wounds. Madam, please eat something. Her eyes were red-rimmed, looking at the bloodstains on my legs with full heartache. I've already asked my nephew in the countryside to buy a pregnancy test stick. I'll find a way to send it to you tomorrow. Dr. Andrew, he doesn't dare offend the master, don't believe him. My heart warmed, this was one of the few kindnesses I've felt in these 3 years. Thank you, Martha. I had just taken 2 sips of porridge when footsteps came from outside. Martha's face changed, she quickly packed up and left in a hurry. The door was pushed open, and Julian walked in. He had changed into home clothes, carrying the moisture from a bath and a faint alcohol scent. He held a document in his hand, walked straight to me, and threw it on me. Sign it. Black and white, the title was, Apology Statement. The content roughly stated that I, Sophia, to gain my husband Julian's attention, falsely claimed pregnancy and self-directed a farce at Miss Lillian's welcome banquet, causing adverse effects to Miss Lin and the Xie family, hereby publicly apologizing. Below was the place for my handwritten signature. What do you mean by this? I asked him, my voice unnaturally calm. The meaning is clear. He lit a cigarette, the smoke blurring his handsome yet cold face. Sign this statement, publicly announce that you did stupid things out of jealousy toward Lillian. I can pretend nothing happened, and you can still sit in the position of Mrs. for a few more days. He said it casually, as if bestowing me with something insignificant. I laughed, laughing until tears nearly came out. What if I don't sign? He took a puff of smoke, slowly exhaling rings, his movements elegant, but his words extremely cruel. Sophia, don't challenge my bottom line again. If you don't sign. He paused, leaned close to me, his cold fingertips lifting my chin, forcing me to meet his gaze. Then I'll assume there's really a bastard in your belly. Then, I'll personally make it, and its mother, disappear completely together. His voice was light, yet carried an unquestionable threat. In that instant, I clearly heard something in my heart completely shatter. It was my foolish heart that had loved him for 3 years. I looked at him, suddenly feeling no more pain, no more anger. Only boundless desolation remained. "Okay," I said. He seemed satisfied with my compliance, released me, and placed a pen on the document. "Sign." I picked up the pen, its tip cold. He thought I would sign that humiliating apology letter. Instead, I flipped the document over and forcefully wrote the words "divorce agreement" on the blank back. I pushed the paper in front of him, lifted my head, and met his astonished gaze. "Julian, sign it." The astonishment on Julian's face lasted only 3 seconds. Then, as if hearing the biggest joke, he laughed lowly. "Divorce?" He picked up the paper I had written on, shaking it contemptuously. "Sophia, what qualifications do you have to mention divorce to me? Is it your destitute gambler father, or your half-dead mother lying in the hospital? Have you forgotten who knelt and begged me to marry you, to help fill your Sioux family's bottomless pit?" Every word he said was like tearing open my bloody scars. I didn't refute. Because what he said was true. 3 years ago, my father failed in investments, owed huge gambling debts, the company went bankrupt, and my mother had a stroke from anger and was hospitalized. It was me, in desperation, who found Julian. I used the verbal marriage agreement set by our family's elders, which he had long forgotten, to beg him to marry me. He agreed. The condition was that I was just a nominal wife, couldn't interfere in any of his affairs, and couldn't have any delusions about him. I agreed. I naively thought marriage was a gamble that could be slowly managed, and I would eventually have a chance to win. Now I know that from the beginning, I had lost utterly. "Why aren't you speaking?" Seeing my silence, the mockery on Julian's face deepened. He held the paper with 2 fingers and, in front of me, tore it into pieces bit by bit. The scraps fluttered down like a despairing snow. "Sophia, put away your tricks of playing hard to get. What you want is nothing but money and status. As long as you obediently listen and play your role well, I temporarily don't want to replace Mrs. Xia. But if you dare play tricks again, next time, it won't be as simple as locking you up." He threw down these words, turned, and left, seemingly convinced that I was completely under his control. I watched his back, without crying or making a fuss. I just calmly picked up the phone he had thrown aside. The phone wasn't taken away because he thought I couldn't make any waves. I dialed the number I knew by heart. The call was quickly answered, and a steady yet concerned male voice came from the other end. "Sophia? How are you? I saw the news. Has that bastard Julian done anything to you?" It was my big brother, Alexander. "Brother. I'm fine. I've decided." There was a silence on the other end, then he understood my meaning. "Thought it through? No more chances for him?" "Yes." "Good." Alexander's voice instantly became decisive and sharp. "I've waited for these words from you for 3 years. What do you want to do? Tell brother, and brother will make it happen." I looked at the pitch-black night outside the window and said softly, "Brother, activate Plan A. I want him to have nothing." On the other end, Alexander laughed, with a hint of indulgence and bloodthirsty excitement. "It should have been like this long ago. My sister isn't someone anyone can bully. Wait and watch the show." After hanging up, I deleted all call records. Then I lay back on the bed and closed my eyes. "Julian, this play is only truly beginning now." The next day, a magnitude 8 earthquake hit our city's financial circle. The Xie Group's largest overseas investor, the mysterious Shield Capital, announced a complete withdrawal of funds without any warning. As soon as the news came out, Xie's stock price plummeted, hitting the limit down within less than an hour of opening. The entire group was in chaos. Julian was frantic, madly convening emergency meetings, trying to contact Shield Capital's person in charge, but only receiving the cold reply, "Business decision, no comment." He mobilized all his connections but couldn't find out why Shield Capital suddenly turned hostile. He suspected business rivals were behind it but found no evidence. In just one day, the Xie Group's market value evaporated by nearly 10 billion. Julian was so busy he didn't touch the ground, with no time to manage me, his imprisoned madwoman. This suited me perfectly. In the evening, he dragged his exhausted body back to the villa, reeking of heavy smoke. He went straight to my room and kicked the door open. "Sophia, was it you?" His eyes bloodshot, like an enraged trapped beast, he stared fixedly at me. "Who did you contact? Who did you leak the company's secrets to?" In his view, a powerless woman like me, who needed to depend on him to survive, the only way to deal with him was to betray him. I was sitting at the dressing table, leisurely combing my hair, as if the outside storms had nothing to do with me. I looked at him through the mirror. "I don't understand what you're saying." "Don't understand?" He rushed over, grabbing my wrist with such force that it almost crushed my bones. "Shield Capital suddenly withdrawing funds, you dare say it has nothing to do with you? I checked all your call records and bank flows, nothing. What method did you use exactly?" I frowned in pain but smiled. "Julian, aren't you overestimating me? I'm just an abandoned woman locked up by you, can't even get out the door. What extraordinary ability do I have to influence a multinational capital's decision?" My words were reasonable, leaving him unable to refute. Yes, how could he believe that the woman he had always trampled underfoot, at his mercy, would be the mastermind who could collapse his empire with one word? He released me, pacing irritably in the room. "If not you, who else?" He fell into a daze, constantly guessing his opponents. I watched his distressed appearance coldly, without any ripple in my heart. At this moment, his phone rang. It was Lillian calling. He answered, his originally irritable tone instantly becoming gentle. "Lillian, don't be afraid, it's a small problem, I can solve it." "Yes, rest well, I'll come accompany you after handling it." After hanging up, he glanced at me, his eyes full of warning. "Sophia, you'd better behave. Once I find out who's behind this, I'll settle your account slowly." He slammed the door and left, probably to comfort his frightened first love. I walked to the window, watching his car disappear into the night. Then, I picked up the small suitcase I had prepared long ago and opened the door he thought could trap me. The spare key Martha gave me had always been in my hand. I didn't alarm anyone and left this golden cage that had imprisoned me for 3 years silently. "Julian, settle accounts slowly? I'm afraid you don't have that time." Julian discovered my disappearance only in the afternoon of the next day. When he found he couldn't contact me no matter what, and all my things in the villa were gone, he felt panic for the first time. He madly sent people to search the whole city, checking all transportation exits, but found no trace of me. He even reported to the police, saying his wife was missing. The police looked at this big shot who called the shots in financial news with strange expressions. "Mr. Julian, we found that your wife, Miss Sophia, handled departure procedures for a private plane yesterday afternoon. Her destination is Switzerland." Julian was stunned. "Private plane? How could Sophia have a private plane?" An ominous premonition spread in his heart. He immediately rushed to the airport but was told that the plane belonged to the Sioux Group, and he had no right to inquire. Sioux Group? Wasn't that bankrupt long ago? Just as he was puzzled, his special assistant called, tone panicked. "Julian, bad news. All our company's overseas projects have been halted. The partners say it's a dead order from Shield Capital, all collaborations related to Xia are terminated. And several domestic banks suddenly withdrew loans, our capital chain is about to break." One bad news after another smashed toward Julian like heavy hammers. He finally understood that this wasn't an attack from business rivals. It was a one-sided, crushing encirclement. And all this started after Sophia's disappearance. He frantically dialed my phone, but it never connected. Finally, through a connection he was extremely reluctant to use, he found the hospital where I was. Switzerland, on the shores of Lake Zurich, a world-top private sanatorium. When Julian, travel-worn, burst into that top-floor suite, he was completely stunned. I was half reclining on the hospital bed, wearing comfortable silk patient clothes, with a professional nutritionist beside me preparing meals. A man in a high-end suit, with a powerful aura, was personally peeling an apple for me. That man, he had seen once, at a financial summit 3 years ago. The current head of the Sioux group, Alexander. A legendary figure known as the Capital Butcher on Wall Street. "Sophia, do you want some honey on the apple?" Alexander's voice was so gentle it could drip water, completely different from the rumors outside. "No need, brother." I shook my head. Alexander then lifted his head, saw Julian at the door, and his originally gentle eyes instantly became sharp. "What are you here for?" Julian ignored him, his gaze locked fixedly on me, his face showing shock, confusion, and a trace of panic he himself hadn't noticed. "Sophia, what exactly is going on?" "Sioux group, you." I looked at him and spoke calmly. "Mr. Julian, I think you've misunderstood. What went bankrupt 3 years ago was just a subsidiary under my father's name. And I, Sophia, am the woman you called unpresentable, and also the sole heir of the Sioux group." At this time, my attending doctor came in and handed a report to Alexander. "Mr. Alexander, Miss Sophia's body is basically stable now. But due to the previous severe impact and fright, the fetal condition was once very unstable, with signs of threatened miscarriage. In the coming months, she must rest quietly and absolutely cannot endure any more stimulation. Fetal instability, threatened miscarriage." Those words exploded like a bolt from the blue in Julian's mind. He stiffened in place, his face instantly turning pale. "The child is really mine? Yours?" Alexander sneered, handing me the peeled apple with careful movements. He stood up and walked step by step to Julian, his height bringing full oppression. "Julian, what qualifications do you have now to mention these 2 words? When my sister needed you most, where were you? You forced her into a dog cage, indulged your new love in humiliating her, watched her bleed, and called her acting. Now, you come asking if the child is yours?" Every sentence from Alexander was like a resounding slap, ruthlessly hitting Julian's face. Julian's lips trembled, unable to say a word. He looked at my flat but carefully protected abdomen, his heart as if gripped by an invisible hand, hurting so much he couldn't breathe. He had always thought I was lying, acting. He never considered it might be true. A living life belonging to him, almost lost due to his stupidity and cruelty. "Sophia." He spoke with difficulty, trying to walk toward me. "Listen to my explanation. I didn't know. I thought." "Stop." I coldly interrupted him. "Mr. Julian, between us, there's nothing left to explain. My brother is here to discuss divorce matters with me. My lawyer will contact you soon." My indifference and detachment made him completely panic. "No, Sophia, I won't divorce." He impulsively stepped forward, wanting to grab my hand. "We won't divorce. I know I was wrong, give me another chance, okay?" Alexander directly blocked him, his gaze ice cold. "Julian, this is Switzerland, not your city. If you dare touch my sister again, I guarantee you won't walk out of this hospital." At this moment, a commotion came from outside the ward. Lillian had actually chased after him. She was probably afraid Julian would be hooked by me, his ex-wife, and followed uneasily. "Julian." She rushed into the ward, seeing the confrontation, and immediately assumed her weak and innocent posture. "Julian, don't listen to her nonsense. She's just trying to deceive you. This woman is full of tricks, who knows whose bastard the child is." She wanted to continue, but Alexander didn't even bother to give her a glance. He just snapped his fingers at the assistant following behind. The assistant understood, took out a tablet, opened a video, and directly handed it to Julian. In the video, it was intimate scenes of Lillian and a strange man, background a hotel. The time was just a few days before her return to the country. "This is..." Julian's pupils contracted sharply. "Oh, forgot to tell you." Alexander said leisurely, "Your pure and innocent first love had a very exciting private life abroad. I have even more explosive ones here, do you want to see? Lillian's face instantly drained of color. No, it's not. Julian, listen to my explanation. They framed me. It's this bitch Sophia who framed me. She screamed hysterically, without any trace of a socialite's demeanor. Julian looked at her, then at me, his face completely collapsing and bewildered. The treasure he had always held in his palms turned out to be garbage discarded by others. And the chaff he discarded like worn shoes was the pearl he should have cherished. How ironic. I watched this farce, feeling only fatigue. Brother, I'm tired. Alexander immediately understood. Throw both of them out for me. Julian and Lillian were escorted out of the hospital. Lillian's end was miserable. Alexander had those videos and photos anonymously sent to major media. Overnight, her pure maiden first love persona completely collapsed, turning into a reviled promiscuous woman from a wealthy family. Her family behind her, to protect themselves, immediately distanced themselves from her. She was abandoned by Julian, expelled by her family, falling from the clouds into the mud. And Julian welcomed his true crematorium. The Xie group, under the full suppression of the Su group, was on the brink. He sold off his properties and luxury cars, begged everywhere, set aside all pride and dignity, but still couldn't turn the tide. In just half a month, that commercial empire that once covered the sky in our city reached the edge of bankruptcy liquidation. He began frequently coming to find me. Or rather, trying to find me. I lived in the Su family's manor in Switzerland, peacefully nurturing the fetus. He couldn't even enter the manor's gate. He just stood outside, standing for a whole day, whether windy or rainy. Zurich's winter is very cold. He wore thin suits, frozen until his lips turned purple, yet stubbornly refused to leave. Like a devout penitent. Unfortunately, his God no longer wanted him. I occasionally saw his wretched appearance from the surveillance. Martha, by my side, sighed. Madam, the master, looks quite pitiful. I smiled and took a sip of bird's nest. Pitiful? When he locked me in the dog cage, did he think I was pitiful? When I was bleeding and begging him to save the child, did he think I was pitiful? Martha, in this world, the least worthwhile is sympathy for the abuser. Martha fell silent. Another week passed, and my divorce lawyer team formally submitted the documents to Julian. He refused to sign. He began using more extreme ways to try to see me. He knelt at the manor gate, letting passing vehicles and pedestrians point at him. The once lofty Julian was now as humble as dust. This news quickly spread back home, becoming the biggest joke in high society. Alexander came to see me, mentioning this with a tone full of satisfaction. Sophia, I'm preparing to launch the final acquisition of Xie. Once the acquisition is complete, Julian will really have nothing left. I nodded, without any special reaction. Brother, just proceed as planned. You really, not softening at all? Alexander asked me. I stroked my already slightly swollen abdomen, feeling the little life's pulsation inside. Brother, no sorrow is greater than a dead heart. My heart died when he made me clean that pool of blood. Everything I'm doing now isn't to revenge him, but to allow me and my child to have an undisturbed, brand new start. Alexander looked at me and smiled gratifiedly. Good. Then I'll give him the last big gift. A few days later, the Xie group declared bankruptcy. On the day the court auctioned assets, Julian didn't appear. He took the last gift I sent him, that itinerary intentionally given to him by Alexander's instruction, and boarded a plane to another city. He thought that was his last chance to win me back. He didn't know it was just the last illusion I prepared for him. On the day I gave birth, Zurich had a heavy snow. It was a boy, very healthy, with a loud cry. Alexander held the tiny infant, smiling from ear to ear. Sophia, look, his brows and eyes look so much like you. I smiled weakly. Brother, give him a name. Alexander thought for a moment. Let's call him Noah. Noah. A nice-sounding name. After discharge, I took Noah, preparing to leave Switzerland and start our life in a brand new place. Before leaving, Alexander handed me a document. This is Julian's recent situation. I opened it and looked. After his complete bankruptcy, he didn't sink into despair. He went to many places, all ones we had been to together or ones I had mentioned wanting to go. He seemed to be retracing my past in this way, trying to find traces of my love for him. Finally, he stayed in our city, found a very ordinary job, and rented in an old neighborhood. That neighborhood was not far from the small house where my family squeezed together when my father went bankrupt. What does he want to do? I asked. Who knows? Alexander shrugged, probably wants to experience your life back then, playing a self-touching redemption game. The document also had a photo. It was candid. Julian wearing cheap work clothes, sitting on street steps, holding a cold bun, eating very slowly. He had lost a lot of weight, become much haggard, no longer having his initial spirited appearance. I quietly looked for a few seconds, then closed the document and handed it back to Alexander. It's all in the past. At the airport, just as I was about to board, I received a call from an unknown number. I hesitated but answered. Sophia. It was Julian. His voice was extremely hoarse, carrying a trace of cautious humility. I didn't know where he got my new number from. I didn't speak. He seemed to know I wouldn't respond and just continued talking to himself. Yesterday, I went to see Aries. It was sent to a rescue station in the suburbs. It's aged a lot. I tried calling it, using the command you taught me before. It still remembers. Sophia, it still remembers, so what about you? Do you still remember? Julian. For the first time, I took the initiative to call his name. On the other end of the line, his breathing caught. I heard the boarding announcement urging passengers to board. I looked at the azure sky outside the window and said calmly. Aries remembers because it's a loyal dog. And I am a person you personally killed once. Dogs and people are different. After saying that, I didn't give him any chance to speak, directly hung up, and blocked the number. I held Noah, who could already walk, and boarded the plane. The plane took off, piercing through the clouds. Sunlight filled the entire cabin, warm and bright. I looked down at Noah. He was opening his shiny black eyes, curiously looking out the window. I smiled. Julian, goodbye. No, never see you again. My new life has nothing to do with you.